Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to open your heart and soul, then do we have the Big Love Show for you. Today I'll be talking with Scott Stabile, best-selling author, screenwriter, speaker, and advocate, and the author of a heartwarming new book on a powerful way to live, Big Love. And that's just what I want to talk with him about today, about the power of living with a wide open heart. That, plus we'll talk about cracked pots in Bali, $16,000 pyramid schemes, August 29th, the power of exactly one African drumming lesson, cough sniffle-itchy, puppies eating smoothies, oatmeal and Baileys, and what in the world tastes like worms wrapped in fish. Gotcha. So welcome to the show, Scott. Are you ready to shine?
I am.
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I want to go back in time. You know approximately where I'm going to go, but maybe we can even go back before that. What were you like before age 14?
What was I like before age 14? I think I was in many ways a pretty regular kid, doing a lot of playing, watching cartoons on Saturday morning. I was a pretty smart kid. I was probably a little more anxious than the average kid in that I was, really concerned about grades and wanted a perfectionist, certainly in my schoolwork and the way I showed up for my life in that way. But other than that, just hanging out with my friends, doing a lot of playing outside in the neighborhood and, making the most of life in that way, like kids do.
And how many brothers and sisters?
Youngest of 7 at the time. One has passed away, but at the time I was the youngest of 7. But really the youngest. I mean, I was a mistake as a kid, or as my mom called me, a change of life, baby. That was the term. So when I was born, my mom was 42, which in 1971 was very old to have a baby. It still is considered fairly old. And my eldest brother was 21 years older than I. So the first 4 kids were all really out of the house by the time I was growing up. And I really just grew up with 2 sisters and then one who was 5 years my senior. So it wasn't like this crowded house of siblings, so I spent a lot of time at home on my own.
Wow. Would you mind sharing with us, I know you've been asked this question a bunch of times, but would you mind sharing with us what happened at age 14?
Sure. My parents were murdered when I was 14. They were shot to death in their store in Detroit. They owned a fruit market convenience store and walked in on their one employee had been stabbed, and the man who stabbed them was still in the store, and he ended up shooting my parents as well. Yeah. So very heavy.
And you had been trying to get your mom to quit working there.
Yes, for a long time. I mean, I spent many days working at the store over the summers and on weekends, and I actually had a very positive experience working there because it introduced me to just a lot of really good, nice people, the people who would come in the store. And at the same time, I recognized the store was not in a particularly safe neighborhood of Detroit, and there was a lot of crime that went on there, and there was violent crime that would happen in the area. So I never felt good about my mom working there, and had begged her for a long time to quit. And that week they were killed on a Monday, and that was to be her last week in the store, actually.
Wow. And so after that, and I gave the highlights to Jessica. She's my wife. She's the producer. And she goes, where did he live? Where did he end up going?
Where did I end up going? Oh, I moved in with my eldest sister, Rose, who was always like a second mom to me, even when my parents were alive. And I moved in with her and her husband and my nephew, Joey.
And then for that time in high school, were you trying to block it out or keep it for people? Because you went from, a normal life plus lots of kids to, in a sense, orphaned.
Yeah, I absolutely blocked it out. I mean, when I reflect on it and I write about this in Big Love, I didn't really do anything consciously in the way that I handled losing my parents. But I'm so grateful that on a subconscious level, I knew, or divine intervention, however it played out, I knew to lock that away, and I just moved on with my life and was still a good student and made a lot of friends at my new school. Was a popular kid. Once a year, I'd have a meltdown cry and then block it away again and move on with my life. And I, it, interestingly enough, in the chapter when I'm writing about this experience in the book called Dig, I'm writing about it to encourage people to do exactly the opposite of what I did as a teenager, even though I recognize that as a teenager, I believe I did exactly what I needed to do to survive it. I don't think I was ready to really be real with my sadness and rage around losing my parents. When I moved to the new school, because also, Michael, I felt like a freak. I mean, I was an orphan suddenly at 14 in suburban Detroit. No one I knew had lost their parent. I don't think I knew anyone who had lost their parents. I certainly didn't know anybody who lost their parents to murder, and it felt like this overwhelming thing. So I in my new school when I moved, I kept it a secret. You know, if people were talking about families or parents in any way, I manipulated conversations. I was always I was really like a chess player, always imagining where a conversation could lead and steering it completely away from anything that could lead to family. So I wouldn't have to talk about my parents, because it was very shocking for people to get that information, especially from a 14-year-old.
I
Please.
wondered, I wonder if that was good then in a sense, because when I read it, it didn't seem like it was good on the surface, but I guess it was a blessing in disguise that you got pulled away from your friends as well.
Well, I don't know if that it was tough. I mean, it was certainly tough, and they all knew. I mean, the
Well,
school that I
that's what I
came
mean.
from, everyone knew in the school that I came from, and that was such a relief, because the truth is, as much energy as I put into hiding
Mhm.
the story of my parents, when I knew someone knew or found out, or if I told them, it was such a relief that I didn't have to keep this secret anymore. You know what I mean? I didn't have to work so much to keep it hidden.
Yeah, I could see that. So you get through college, and I believe you did very well. How'd you end up in San Francisco?
Well, I grew up in Michigan. I went to school in Michigan. I loved my college, but I couldn't wait to get to San Francisco. San Francisco, for me, I had visited once in college, and it was like, get me to that city. It was progressive. It was beautiful. It was all of these things that I wanted in my life. I was also coming to terms with my sexuality, and I knew San Francisco would help me come out, that would be the place to be for that process as well. So it called me in many ways.
So you get out there, you'd been experiencing, you talked about this earlier, about once a year the lid would come off and you'd melt down, and then you're in San Francisco and the lid really came off.
Yeah, I had that yearly meltdown, only it didn't stop. I was just crying for days in my room and thinking, really, I thought I'm losing my mind. Like this is it. Like I don't know how to get a grip back on myself. And I opened the yellow pages, which we had. I don't know if they still exist, but the yellow pages, and really closed. It was one of those moments you're like, you didn't really do that, but I closed my eyes and point and opened to the therapists,
Yeah.
pointed to one, called that woman, and for the next 6 weeks met with her. That's all I could afford at the time. But it was really important for me because it got me back. It got me grounded again. And in every one of those sessions, it was just talking about my parents and crying about my parents and sharing rage about my parents. And I saw that I can have these conversations, because I would never talk about them, and I'd never feel what I needed to feel about them except that once a year. So that really opened me up. At the same time, I found a job in a store with an incredible self-help spirituality book section. So I started reading all these books about enlightenment and love and being with your pain and facing your fears and all these things that were also opening me up to the experience at the time.
Beautiful. And now if we double back, I can see why you're recommending that people do the opposite way of what you did. You did what you did maybe to cope because you had been pulled away from your coping mechanism. So it was
Yeah.
one times too many. You then had to start from scratch and go, I am Scott and blah, 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 and blah, 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 which is like 10 times harder than those who already knew you, and opening up to them might have been much easier.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And just in recognizing, and what I've recognized in my life over and over and over since my 20s, is that uh, the more personal exploration we do and the more honest we are with everything that's going on inside of us, all the emotions that are working, all the emotions that come from past experiences into our present, the more present we are in our connections, in our relationships with others, and the much deeper those relationships can be.
I love it. That's the term I was telling you beforehand. I call that the open-hearted warrior. You've dropped
Yeah.
your shields, you're standing forward, proud, and you're not keeping things buried.
Yes.
So around this time, and I don't have the timeline exact, you mentioned at the beginning of the show that you had come from a family of 7, but you lost one. Maybe you can share a little bit about your brother Ricky.
Yeah, he was 18 years my senior, and as far as anyone in my family knows, he started his addiction around the time he was 18. So my entire life was was seeing my brother as someone addicted to heroin. That was the lens through which I saw him, and he was a very beautiful, loving, sweet spirit, man. Someone you love instantly, you know what I mean, and makes very quick friends. And he was addicted to heroin, for his entire adult life. So 9 years after my parents died, he ended up ODing and dying from his addiction.
Wow. What did it teach you, or what did it remind you at that point?
Well, I mean, look, my relationship with Ricky has gone through many hills and valleys, and even after his, I feel like I became most clear about my relationship with him and about how I view his addiction only after he died, and only after I'd moved through a lot of anger and a lot of resentment about the trauma he brought to our family. Growing up around addiction, it's traumatic, and it impacts the family in many, many, many different ways. But I came to recognize after his death. I mean, truly, when I found out he died, it wasn't a surprise. I think that all of my siblings, we all expected that call someday, and so it doesn't make it less sad, but it wasn't the shock of losing my parents and the way they were lost. It felt different. And in some ways, there was a feeling of relief around losing my brother, only because at the time I felt like he was never going to overcome it. And to know that he was finally done, like being in and out of jails and in and out of smack houses and living on the streets and all of these different things that were created because of his addiction, I felt like he was finally at peace, and there was some peacefulness that came from that. But in reflecting, I grew to believe that Ricky could never have made the choice to move beyond his addiction. And when I look at addiction now, I don't view it through that same lens. I think we have so many examples of people moving beyond their addiction, making the choice for their sobriety. So I believe that it's always possible, no matter how ugly your addiction may be and where you are in the midst of it, that it's always possible to make that choice to move beyond. And that's not an easy choice to make, certainly, but I think it's possible.
So I can't believe I'm going here, but why not? I am Facebook challenged because
Okay.
I am terrified of getting sucked in. Every time I go into Facebook, I turn tail and run. Have you managed to keep that sane, or has that world sucked you in as well? Because you have an amazing following.
I'm totally addicted to social media. Yeah, and it's not in an unhealthy way right now. Yes, I haven't managed to keep it sane, and in the moments that I do, it takes absolute focus and consciousness. And I mean, it's exacerbated by the fact that my work is it's so integrated to my Facebook community. And you know what I mean? My book
I
wouldn't even
know.
exist without my Facebook community. I know it wouldn't. So it is hard for me. I'm very committed to being present on Facebook each day in some way. So no, it's been difficult. And I recognize the times when it's most unhealthy,
You actually have a label on your Facebook page. I'm sure you've seen this that says if you click to get in touch with you, the celebrity on your page there, it says responds instantly.
You know, it's funny, but I really don't. And that's the thing. There's an auto response set up, which is the only
Nice.
reason it says that. I never, you know, what's funny with the messaging? I used to try to respond to everyone who wrote, and then there were too many people. And then I became overwhelmed because I'm like, I'm not responding. So I turned off the possibility of messaging me and I turned it back on. But I did set up an auto response, and it kind of encourages people to go to my website if they really want to reach me. And the funny thing is most people don't. So I think like if they make the extra step, then I'll make the extra step
I like
as
it.
well, you know.
Let's talk about some other positives during this time. And you're working at, I believe it's called New Moon Bookstore, and or New Moon. It's an alternative shop.
Yes. That's the fake name too.
I like it, and there are many fake names. I appreciated that in here as well. It helped you get into writing, I believe.
Well, you know what helped me get into writing actually was something I don't really talk about in the book. But when I was in college, I went on this. The summer between my junior and senior year, I went to a program called the New England Literature Program, and we spent 6 weeks on Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire studying all the transcendental authors. And we, in lieu of like homework and stuff like that, we were just told to bring a journal, and everything we did was put into this journal. And it's the first time I had ever done writing in a journal. And it's the first time I'd ever really taken time to play with creative writing. So that actually really sparked my interest in writing creatively. I was always a decent creative writer in school and in college, but I never saw it as a real passion or something I would put my energy into doing until that experience.
Did the writing then, it's something we teach a lot in our coaching, did the writing help you to work through the pain and start to begin to heal and start to be able to reflect with yourself?
Writing for me is one of the greatest tools for that. And look, I think if you know how to write, then you're a writer and you have the capacity to do great stuff with writing, especially in terms of healing. Writing for me is one of the greatest tools to process pain. Especially writing helps me process my rage really well, because when I'm inclined to rage at someone or someone's provoked me or whatever, and if I return to my journal and get all that like nasty vomit out in the page, I find I can so often come back to the conversation with much more empathy and much more compassion. Writing is a great tool for sadness. It's a great tool for self-exploration, because I found that sometimes where I start in my writing and where I end are in completely different places. And if I hadn't taken the time to maybe write things out, I'm not sure I ever would have gotten there.
Awesome. So let's go from there and let's talk about, there was a good segue and I'm not sure how to call it, but maybe we'll just talk about cough sniffleitchy and the cougher. Yes.
Well, that chapter, the chapter is about shame. That's really what the chapter is about. But what I use I use a few things, but I talk about my cough because I cough a lot, and the cough sniffleitchy, it's because I cough a lot and I sniffle a lot and I make this sound in my nose like a cheese sound, and it's all of these respiratory sounds I'm always making, and the shame that I've carried around making this noise in my life, because I feel like they can be very present and very obvious, and other people notice them as well. And the story is set in a airline club in the airport, because this man lets out this gigantic, like Godzilla-like cough about once every minute, and I just watched him and studied him for minutes and minutes and minutes, and he's completely unfazed by it. Everyone else is completely aware of it. It is really a sound you can't ignore, but I was amazed by his nonchalance with it, and the way that it's obviously a part of his life. And he seems completely, nonchalant about whether people are judging him for it, even paying attention to him in any way. And so it got me thinking about my cough and the way that it's impacted my life. And it got me thinking about the other things that I felt ashamed of in my life. My sexuality, again, being the biggest thing. Yeah. And the way that shame controls us when we're secret about it. You know, shame tells us to keep those things that we're ashamed of a secret, and the power that lives in announcing our shame to the world. And certainly, this book, I'm announcing everything about myself to the world. But there is a power when you share these things, because we create these big secrets inside, and we think we're these, you know, these monsters based on whatever shame we're carrying around. But when we start to share them with a close friend or a stranger or a therapist or whatever to our Facebook community, we start to see that the shame doesn't have to own us in the same way. And it's so often not as powerful or important as we thought it was. And we can look back on some of those things and we laugh like, why was I ever so ashamed of that? You know?
I want to take that from there and take it back to social media, which is a comment that I get on social media a lot. And so you must get it tenfold, which is, you may be lovable, Scott. Everybody else may be lovable, but because of something, and they don't maybe say or maybe don't say, and it has to do with shame, I'm not lovable.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's just nonsense. You know, that is the mind. That's the ego doing the self-abusive things that the ego does. I mean, my deep belief is that we are all born worthy, we are all born lovable, and that there's nothing you can do in your life to make you any less worthy. At the same time, there's nothing you can do to make you any more worthy. You know, we're all on equal ground in terms of worth and lovability, if that's a word. I don't even know.
Why not?
Yeah. So to a person who's convinced of that, I would say a few things. I would say, one, it takes work. When we all have minds that very naturally play in the world of self-abuse. We all have inner critics. It's very easy to judge ourselves. So to move beyond that judgment, we have to be willing to do the work involved with loving ourselves. Some of that work happens by taking care of ourselves. You know, the more we take care of ourselves, the more we feed those parts, and we recognize, you know, what stands to serve our well-being and greater happiness in our lives. The more we do those things, we're going to find that we're feeling better in general, and that we're likely to feel better about ourselves in general. When I'm feeling really low and like I'm this hideous monster, I try to connect with the people in my life who love me. And I remind myself that these people are incredibly beautiful, wonderful, wise people. Why are they choosing to love me if I'm not lovable? How can it be true that I'm not lovable when I have these people in my life who see me as a lovable person of value? You know, I call on every tool I have at my disposal when I'm feeling really low about myself to bring myself to that reminder that we're all worthy and we're all lovable.
Thank you. And that brings up another key word then, which is non-judgment.
Yeah, in terms of how we're viewing ourselves, or in general?
Well, both, but in terms of how we're viewing ourselves, or how you're viewing yourself, there's one thing to get down on yourself and to not feel lovable and to be asking about why would these other people, which is brilliant, think I'm lovable if I don't think I'm lovable. But then there's also taking it one layer further, as crazy as it is, not getting down on ourselves for having the moment of downness when we're not feeling lovable.
Absolutely. Or to take that a step further, not getting down on ourselves when we're getting down on ourselves.
Bingo.
Do you know what I mean? There's always a deeper level, and that for me is acceptance. And that's been, I think, one of the greater lessons in my life these past few years. And one of the things that I keep coming back to is finding my acceptance with whatever's going on for me. And that means finding acceptance with the part of myself that doesn't accept whatever's going on for me. You know, there's always a deeper level to acceptance, or to getting beyond our judgment with each other. And that comes back to recognizing we're all human. We're all dealing with the same stuff. We're all judging ourselves all the time. We're all trying to move beyond judging ourselves. We're all doing this. We're all doing that. We all know grief. We all know happiness. We all know everything in the human experience from our own circumstances and perspective. And the more often I remind myself of that, and just recognize that I'm just a human being doing the best I can do, and I try to just accept that understanding, the more peaceful I am in this crazy, unpredictable journey in life.
Woohoo! Woohoo! So let's go from there and go for non-judgment and forgiving ourselves and taking care of ourselves. Oh my God, I apologize in advance. What was the Oogie Loves?
You don't have to apologize. I'm not apologizing. The Oogie Loves is a film called The Oogie Loves and the Big Balloon Adventure, and it was a children's interactive musical that I wrote, and it bombed epically.
I will give a congratulations first, which is you got in theaters worldwide or nationwide, which is something that the majority of movie writers or screenwriters out there will never, ever, ever do.
Yeah, it was released on more than 2,000 screens in the US. I had nothing to do with it. I mean, I wrote it, but I had nothing to do with making that part of it happen. But it was a very wide release, it's called in the industry. And it holds the record today still as the lowest grossing wide release film in history. It is the biggest bomb in history. And it bombed commercially, it bombed critically, it bombed in every imaginable way, and dramatically so. So the chapter I write about the Oogie Loves is a chapter about success and failure. And I'm encouraging people, one, to look at their definition of success and their definition of failure. With the Oogie Loves, because it was such a, you're riding such a high and the movie's going to come out, and we were doing this mommy blogger tour. So we were sitting in audiences with kids and their moms, and kids were getting into it. I don't know if a lot of the moms knew how to take it in, but the kids seemed to be enjoying it. And I was really on this high before it was released. And then it released and it bombed, so badly that it was a really like a steep drop to the low. And, I saw it as just this profound failure, and was very depressed and very embarrassed and humiliated and thinking this is going to be the end of, my career as a screen. Just all the worst case scenarios that you could drum up is what I was drumming up. And when I chose to reflect on it a bit differently, it's like, I'm somebody who hasn't always been the greatest with follow through in my life. That's an understatement. So I have a lot of, incomplete scripts and things like that in my life. And it's like, yeah, I could judge this movie based on how it did in the theaters, or I could look at, I finished a screenplay and I had a lot of fun writing a screenplay, and the screenplay made it into a lot of theaters. There are a lot of levels to the idea of success. But even more importantly, what I've come to find in my life is that really how I view success is rooted in how am I showing up as a human being in this world? Am I showing up with an open heart? Am I showing up with compassion? Am I showing up with love? And when I'm showing up in that way for my fellow human beings and for myself, I'm living my life as successfully as I can possibly live it. I also fail in that world constantly too. I mean, I'm not always showing up with love, and I'm not always showing up with compassion and empathy. I'm doing my best and I'm getting myself back there. Mm-hmm. But that's really what I view success. And Michael, I can say that and I mean that, but I also recognize now that Big Love's out, how much of my mind and ego is like, oh, I want the book to sell well, and I want people to like my book, and I want all of those things too.
Buy the book.
Yeah.
Buy the book. Buy the book.
You know what I mean? And that comes back to, that's just real. I don't think I'll ever put anything out there creatively without wanting people to receive it well, even though I recognize that's not ultimately what's most important.
On the other hand, there's a juice in that. If you're writing and you realize it's going to reach people and you're hopeful that it will reach a lot of people, that helps keep you going in the middle of the night you're going, do I really need to complete this thing right now? Because completing a book is no small endeavor. So you use that energy, which you did great.
Yeah, I love how you put that, and it's absolutely true. And I'll tell you what's kept me, I've had my Facebook page now for over 5 years, and with the exception, I think, of 3 days, I have posted on that page every day. And what's kept me, sometimes I'm scheduling out posts if I'm on a vacation, but things are showing up there every day and engagement's happening. But what's kept me going is exactly what you're talking about. It's the juice that happens from that page, and it's the messages I get from people who are saying to me, the work you're doing matters. The work you're doing has impacted my life. It is helping me. And And knowing that that's the case, and also recognizing how much that connection has helped me. I mean, I was living in Panama for a few years, and part of that experience in Panama, I was dealing with a lot of isolation. And I would go to my Facebook page and I would push go live on a video, and suddenly I'm connecting with people all over the world, and it's real live in time energy exchange, and it keeps me going too.
Awesome. And then as a there's always a silver lining. There's always something positive that can come out of an experience if we look for it hard enough. You don't have to look far with Oogie Loves, because your Facebook page came out of it.
Absolutely. And I didn't even remember that until I was writing the book, and I was reflecting back on the Oogie Loves. When the movie was happening, a PR person for the film said to me, "Hey, Scott, why don't you start a Facebook page, an author page separate from your personal profile, so you can engage with fans and you can promote the movie." And as it turned out, there weren't a lot of fans and I didn't have a lot of promotion to do. But suddenly I did have a page, and I asked myself, well, what do you really want to be writing about on this page? And the answer was love, compassion, forgiveness, moving through fears, all the things that I love to write and talk about. And without the Oogie Loves, I don't think that page would have existed. And without that page, Big Love wouldn't have existed.
Woo!
Yeah, no, I love that, because it's true. How I phrase it is, it's like we really never know what seeds we're planting as we move forward in our lives. We never know. And all we can do is keep planting, keep moving forward, despite our fears, despite our failures, despite everything else, and see what we can create in the harvest down the line.
And there's always something. That's it. If you put that one foot in front of the other.
Absolutely. I really believe that.
So let's go from there. Let's talk a little bit about self-care. And first off, what does taste like worms wrapped in fish?
Well, I don't know, because I didn't say that. That was my friend.
Okay, what tastes like cat urine?
I don't know that either. But this is a chapter on green tea when I'm talking about the different iterations of bitter green tea if you let it steep too long, and how a friend of mine hates green tea and said it tastes like worms wrapped in fish, which I can only imagine, but don't really want to imagine what that tastes like. And I can only imagine what cat urine tastes like, but I can't say that I've tasted that either, thankfully.
So what does steeping tea, or setting a timer, or having shorts that fit you well,
comfortable undies,
yes, have to do with anything?
Yeah, that's a good question. Ostensibly it's very minor. That chapter is about self-care, and the example I used was how I went for years, well, for a long, long time, actually probably years, making my green tea and never timing it. Even though I would look at, I had my phone right there, so it wasn't hard to do, and always drinking really bad cups of tea, because green tea shouldn't steep for too long. Mm-hmm. It should, for me, a minute 45 seconds is the ideal time. If you steep green tea for too long, it tastes terrible. And anyone who's ever done it, which is anyone who's ever had a cup of green tea, probably knows this. And the longer it steeps, the worse it tastes, until you get to what I imagine cat urine to taste like.
Which is probably why I hate green tea.
It may be. For some, yeah, exactly. So but the chapter is about, then I finally started timing my tea. Mm-hmm. And every day I was having a cup of green tea, a perfect cup of green tea. And then I cut to realizing one day I'm sitting there writing, and I'm in these uncomfortable underwear, and I'm shifting and lodging. I'm thinking, oh, these underwear suck. They're so uncomfortable. And I'm having this conversation, and it's interrupting my writing process, until I realized I don't have to wear them. I can actually take them off. And I think we can all relate to wearing uncomfortable underwear. And the crazy thing is, I think most of us can relate to continuing to wear uncomfortable underwear, even when we've brought awareness to the fact that they're uncomfortable. So I took them off, and I sliced them up with scissors and threw them in the trash, and went through my underwear drawer and threw out the other underwear that weren't comfortable. And though these seem like minor examples of self-care, they're really speaking to greater energy, which is basically the energy of saying, I care enough about myself to take care of myself in these instances, which will lead me to take care of myself in greater instances. So the fact that I didn't time my tea and was choosing to drink really bad tea seems minor, but it actually is a reflection on how I feel about myself, that I am not worthy of myself, or I don't love myself enough to take 10 seconds to set a timer, or I don't love myself enough to wear underwear that actually feel comfortable as I move through the day. And the beauty of that in any area of our lives is when we're taking time to show up for ourselves in a way that is caring, we're going to take time to show up for ourselves in bigger ways in our lives. And beautifully, when we become more aware of the things that serve our lives positively, we're going to become more attuned to those things in our lives that don't serve us positively. And we're going to start to eliminate those things from our lives. And that's all part of self-care as well.
Get the scissors and get busy.
Exactly.
Woohoo! All right, going from self-care, let's talk about a bigger care, kindness and compassion. Maybe you can tell us who was Kevin.
Yes. So he was a roommate that I lived with. I hesitated only for a split second because I've changed the names of so many people.
I knew what was going on.
I'm like,
and I wanted to go, and that's not his real name either.
Yeah, that's not his real name either. And who are we talking about? Yes.
You did a great job.
Did I sell it? So he was a roommate of mine who, for a couple years in the Bay Area, who was dealing with a slip disc in his back. He was dealing with a lot of anxiety, and he ended up being on a lot of meds for it. And he ended up becoming addicted to his prescription meds. So the trajectory of my path living with him was knowing him as an incredibly insightful, clear, hardworking man, to one who was becoming less of all those things in part because of the prescription drugs. Mm-hmm. So I would come home to him at times, and he would be slurring and just not very aware and not very present. And he was hurting himself with his addiction, and he ended up dying because of his prescription drug. He overdosed on prescription drugs, and not while I was living there. This was a few years after. But I don't know what you specifically want me to talk about with him, but for me, what was a great struggle and what I write about in the chapter was really showing up for him as a friend. Yeah. Because I stayed silent a lot of the time that I was living with him, even though I saw him. I brought up potentially seeing another doctor and changing meds, but I never really called him out and said, listen, I believe you're addicted to your meds and that you need to do something about it. And I didn't do that until I was living in New York, across the country, at a safe distance from having to be a really big part of whatever choices he would make around his addiction. But I finally sent him an email saying, you're hurting yourself. I think you're addicted to your medication. I know you're addicted to your medication, and you need to make different choices for your life. And I'm here for you if I can be here for you in that process. But what that chapter was about for me so much was about friendship, because it was looking at the times in our lives where we're not making the harder choices for our friends. Because ultimately by having the harder conversation, or by putting the mirror up, in a way that could be really difficult for the friend. When we do that, what we're really doing is we're jeopardizing our friendship, but for the well-being of the other person involved. That's really how I look at it. We're calling on our courage to say that this friendship and this friend is so important that I understand that by bringing up these difficult things, he may choose to walk away from me as a friend. Mm-hmm. But it's more important. He is more important than our friendship is in this moment. And making that choice for a friend, I think, is the best thing we can do at times for our friends. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And as somebody who's lost a dear friend myself, as strange as it sounds, there's a peace in knowing that at least you put forth that effort, and you hope that effort is absolutely enough. But a real friend is willing to step into that fear and go for that. And you did.
Absolutely. And and as you said, trust in whatever comes of it. Mm-hmm. And that chapter is a reminder to all of us to really consider how we're showing up in our friendships. And I still see myself, look, everything in Big Love is, I'm talking about lessons I've learned and wisdom I've gleaned from my life experience. And in moments, I'm like rock solid in that. But a lot of the time, I'm not at all. I'm still relearning it and reminding myself, you're not showing up here as well as you can show up, but encouraging us to all look at how are we showing up in our friendships? Where are we choosing to stay silent, and what is prompting us to stay silent? And is it fear? And is fear enough? You know what I mean? Is fear more important to you than the well-being of your friend or your friendship?
Yeah. Thank you. On that note, how are you stepping forward into the fear and fear in general?
Yeah, that's something I've gotten much, much better at in my life. It's because again, having the Facebook page, and the page grew a lot, and putting myself out there creatively and in the live videos and just in so many different ways in these past years, it's a constant confrontation with my fear. Because what I've learned in my life is that our fear never disappears. You know, we can wait to become fearless before we do that thing we're afraid to do. But what I think we're going to find is that we never become fearless. And we end up not doing that thing we want to do simply because we're afraid to do it. So what I've learned in my life is that my fear is just trying to protect me. It's not the horrible bully I've made it out to be, but it's not that smart. It doesn't distinguish between running into a burning building or having the difficult conversation. You know, our fear sees anything that's uncomfortable as something to avoid. So I have a very different relationship with my fear now. Rather than this horrible tyrant, it's like a nagging 5-year-old brother. And it's always tugging. It's always like, that's going to hurt. That's going to be uncomfortable. And as Elizabeth Gilbert writes in her book, Big Magic, and talks about, in terms of creativity, fear so beautifully. And what she says is every time she approaches any creative project, she tells her fear, look, I know it's your job to be here. I know you need to be here, and you get to come along for the ride, but you get the back seat. And under no circumstance do you get to take the steering wheel. And I love that, because that's exactly how I view it. It's like I let my fear have its say, but I don't let it have its way. And what I've learned, and we do learn this once we continuously make brave choices, is that the fear doesn't have to take ownership of us. It's not going to go anywhere, but we learn that we can still move forward despite the fear. And the fear is just going to come along and do what it needs to do. And we're going to do what we need to do, you know?
There's a big word that's describing a lot of what is here on top of the love, and it maybe is what is allowing the love to shine or allowing the love to come through, is you're bringing a lot of presence to everything.
As much as possible. And I think it's important to. I mean, look, again, I'm not great. I'm not like 100% with that, but I do my best to be present with whatever's going on in my life. I do my best to bring awareness to the present moment and take ownership of what is happening for me. You know, we very naturally blame others for everything. We're living at a time in this country where everyone's pointing finger, everyone's blaming. People aren't showing up to conversations with empathy, with much consideration for the other person involved. And I think we are most well served by taking responsibility for how am I showing up? If I'm complaining about all the hatred and vitriol that I'm seeing, am I making a point to show up with presence and love and compassion? And if not, then what right do I have to complain about all of this negative dialogue that I'm seeing in the world?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. From there, let's talk about what you used to say was choosing happiness. What would you say about happiness now?
It's a feeling, and we don't choose our feelings. And I don't think we serve people by leading them to believe that they can choose happiness in every moment, because if you're a human being, you know that that's not accurate. You know, we can't choose happiness. So, which is one important thing I think to recognize, because what I think happens in the metaphysical world and the personal development world, there's so many memes and messages saying, you can choose happiness, and happiness is a choice, that how we ultimately feel when we're not happy is one, we feel like a failure. And I have felt this way. I'm like, I'm supposed to be able to choose happiness, but I'm not happy in this moment. So not only am I unhappy, I feel like I'm a failure for not choosing my happiness, you know? And when we recognize, we don't choose our feelings. If someone in your life dies, or your partner or spouse leaves you, no matter what you say to the heavens, you're not going to be able to choose happiness in that moment. It's not how feelings work. But what I like to remind people is that we absolutely can choose the actions that stand to create greater happiness in our lives. And that is something we can absolutely take ownership over. The example I use in the book is I love to play tennis, and I know that by playing tennis, I stand to create more happiness in my life. But choosing tennis is very different than choosing happiness. If long walks on the beach for you stand to create more happiness in your life, that's a choice you can make, long walks on the beach, and see how that affects you. And I'm always encouraging people to consider their lives and to consider the choices that they can be making right now that stand to serve their well-being and greater joy in their lives, and make those choices.
Thank you. From there, let's talk about what ifs. And you shared the craziest story, which you can or cannot, it's totally up to you to go on. But share with us about what ifs.
Yeah, I'll first of all, this is your show, so I'm happy to share anything. And
you go, boy.
Well, I write about what ifs in the context of donating sperm to a couple of friends who were trying to have a baby, and so I knew that by donating sperm to these friends, that if they were to get pregnant, I would have a child, a biological child in the world. So I didn't, on the one hand, it's just donating sperm. I was going to do this. It's just donating sperm. And that is the truth. But on the other hand, this is, I will have a biological kid in the world. So I wanted to approach this, with some consciousness and really give consideration to the choice. So I was thinking about all of the things that could go wrong. When you're talking about the what ifs, it was like, well, what if they want me to be more, a part of the kid's life in a way that I don't want to be a part of the kid's life? What if they don't allow me to be a part of the kid's life in a way that I want to be a part of the kid's life? What if, my friend miscarries? What if and then it led to basically, what if the kid dies? It's all of these worst case scenarios, basically. And I think that we often do that when we're facing our fears, with fear of the unknown and fear of making big changes in our lives. We always go through that battery of what ifs. What if this happens? What if that happens? And it's usually in the negative. Mm-hmm. So what I've come to find in my life, again, and this is approaching fear, is one, I think it's always important, if we're going to go through all of the negative what ifs, to at least also consider all of the positive what ifs that could come from any given situation, because that is so often the thing that helps us find the courage to make that big change we know we need to make. And also to recognize, I use my partner as an example, and I use all of the what ifs that happened when I was falling in love with my partner. And, what if we don't agree on monogamy? What if he falls more in love with me than I fall in love with him? What if he breaks my heart? What if I break his heart? And just recognizing that these what ifs are a part of every big thing in our lives. And we can choose to let them prevent us mm-hmm. from doing stuff, or we can just recognize it's just a part of life. The what ifs are a part of life. And when we see that we are empowered to make brave choices, we are born with the courage to make these choices. We come to find that the what ifs don't have to control us,
Woohoo! Let's go from there and I want to talk about one more powerful choice. There's actually a couple I'm going to talk about, but there's one in particular first here that I want to talk about that had, I think, liberating consequences, but was very difficult at the time. And that was the power of choosing yes.
Yes, I mean, I was a part of a spiritual community, aka cult, for 13 years, and I mean, the message of that chapter, in part, I shared that because I share so much about myself, and this is something I hadn't shared until writing this book, and I felt like it would have been disingenuous not to talk about this because it's been such a big part of my life. But what I've learned, one of the things I learned from the experience of being a part of the spiritual community and choosing a guru as my teacher, and then coming to find that this man who proclaimed himself to be an enlightened individual on par with Buddha and Jesus and all the other enlightened masters, wasn't actually who he said he was, or I didn't believe him to be who he actually said he was. And the process of moving beyond this man and ultimately this community what I reflect on in the chapter and want to remind people of, because I suspect the people who are tuning into your show are seekers like me, and like you, and we're out there seeking, and spiritual seekers tend to look for teachers. It's just like the natural path to seeking is looking for teachers in the way of podcasts, in the way of books, in the way of, human beings out there sharing their wisdom. And what I learned from this experience is that no matter who in your life is choosing this teacher, and even if you've chosen this teacher for 5 or 10 or 15 years, and this person no longer serves you in a way that feels good, you are the person that is empowered to move beyond the teacher at any point. And by doing so, you create space to bring new teachers into your lives. Basically, what I'm saying is that you are the only person who is needed on your spiritual path for your growth. I am the only person who is needed on my spiritual path for my growth. Whoever else we invite to play in this world of our growth and healing is up to us. And we send out those invitations, so we make that choice. We can unchoose those people as well. And it's, we function in a society with tribes in the way that we're grown up around religion, and we're in so many different areas. We find ourselves as a part of a tribe, and it can be very difficult to move on from that tribe if everyone else is still saying this person is the one we follow, and you're like, this doesn't feel good to me anymore. But I really encourage people to look at why they're staying present if it doesn't feel good in any relationship in their lives, and to recognize that they don't have to stay present in that relationship. They can make a different choice. They can say yes to something else.
That's the say yes.
Yes.
Yes, we brought it full circle there. And that is saying yes to you.
Saying yes to your truth. Yes, saying yes to yourself. Absolutely.
So from there, thank you. Let's go to something that you do at least once a year that at first I was shocked about, and then I was like, this is the most brilliant, beautiful thing. You tell us what you Google once a year.
Yeah, the Amish schoolhouse shooting that happened in our country several years ago. I can't remember what year now. I think 2006, where a man came into an Amish schoolhouse and shot 10 to 15 girls, killing 5 of them, injuring the rest of them. And the Amish community responded in an incredibly powerful, beautiful way. They responded with forgiveness. And this is an act that most people, and this made, worldwide headlines in great part, not just because of the mass shooting, which would have made headlines on its own, but in great part because of the community's response to the shooting. And, they took something that most people around the world would see as unforgivable, and they said, we practice forgiveness, and we are going to practice forgiveness here. So they showed up at the funeral of the killer. They set up a fund for the wife and family of the killer to support them. They visited with the wife and family of the killer to let them know that they were there as a support, and to let them know that they did not blame them for what transpired. And they really lived in the presence of what they believed through their religion, which is we are here to forgive, and that love demands forgiveness, and that in their eyes, God demands forgiveness. So they showed up from that place. And for me, it's just was such a beautiful example of what I see as one of the most important and certainly the most difficult mandates of love, which is forgiveness.
Thank you. Have you forgiven your parents' killer?
Yes, and that's what I'm writing about in that chapter and that's been one of the greatest gifts for me of that experience, was seeing that I could take something that most people would see as unforgivable, and I could find my way to forgiveness. And I'll tell you, the only way I found my way to forgiveness, and what I think is the path to forgiveness more often than not, was empathy. It was only when I started to take the time to imagine their killer's life experience and recognize that this man could not have been operating from any sense of self-worth or self-love or being seen in the world, being taken care of in this world. And though I couldn't connect to killing somebody. I could connect. I've been so mad at my life, at things out there. I've wished people would die. I have felt so unloved and unseen in my life. I have felt all these things that I imagine this man was feeling in his life. And I could see his humanity. And then I noticed that when I would start to think about him, it was through this lens of forgiveness, and that's what I feel is the way we get to forgiveness of others, when we take the time to imagine what it's like to walk in their shoes, to imagine their struggle, and to remember their humanity. Forgiveness will eventually find you.
Awesome. What did it take to forgive yourself for not pushing your mom harder?
I think it's the same path, and I think that self everything is harder, I think, than anything else. And self-forgiveness is the same way. I think just recognizing who I was as a 14-year-old child, and recognizing that there really was nothing that I could have done beyond what I did. And that even if I had done more, ultimately it was my mom was an adult who was making the choices that she was making for herself.
And to clarify, push her harder to quit the market.
To quit the market sooner, and to potentially save her life by doing so.
Yeah. How have you cranked up that self-love to yourself now?
How have I cranked it up? I think I crank it up in the choices I'm making in my life. I think that one, I really like the work I'm doing in the world. I really believe in love with everything that I have. I believe that love is the most powerful choice we can make. Period. I think it's the choice. And when I'm talking about love, I'm talking about the energy of love and all that serves, like kindness and compassion and forgiveness and authenticity. So knowing in my belief that love is the most powerful choice we can make to move our world forward in a positive way, I'm speaking about the love that I'm giving others as well as the love that I'm giving myself. And knowing that I'm serving myself best by loving myself, I'm conscious of the love that I'm giving myself. So even though my mind still goes to the judgment and still goes to the abuse, I don't let it get on that runaway train in the same way. When I bring awareness to those self-abusive thoughts, I try to interrupt it. And I always ask myself the question, like, what does love invite me to do in this moment? How is love asking me to respond to this moment? And I ask that question in terms of my relationship with others and with myself all the time.
Brilliant. Woohoo!
Woohoo!
If I took off my coaching hat right now and I put it on you, what one homework assignment would you give people so they don't leave this show without taking some action regarding love themselves in their lives?
Yeah, well, what I would say is really sit down for even 5 minutes and write it down. Consider the choices you could be making in your life right now that would stand to serve your happiness. And that is an act of personal self-care. Even if it's only 5 minutes a day, write down that list and then start doing those things, even if it's only 5 minutes a day. And the other thing I would say to people is, all throughout the day, if you can, remember to ask yourself the question, how does love invite me to respond to this moment? And your life will change. I really believe that.
Woohoo! This one, we know you don't have kids. We've been through that. But what advice would you give parents? This is something Jessica, she always wants me to ask. What advice would you give parents to help their kids today?
Well, I think one is to just recognize that you are the prime role model for your children. So and children are sponges. So they are observing you and taking in everything you're doing. So the more often you show up in your life with kindness, with compassion, the more you are a reflection of those things, the more examples of those things your children will be receiving on a daily basis. And that, I think, I have to believe that's one of the most important things parents can do, is just how are you showing up in your life? And how are you showing up in your kid's life with that kindness, with that compassion, with that empathy as well?
I love it. From there, talking about showing up in your life, what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
Connection with people, connection with, as you call them, open-hearted warriors. I mean, for me, like this conversation we're having, the ability to connect with others out there who recognize the power of love and who are committed to showing up in their lives with more compassion and with a more open, kind heart. There's nothing that gets me higher than that, truly.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
So from there, where can people go to find Big Love and to find out more? And may you sell 1 million copies plus of this beautiful book.
Thank you so much. Well, you can find me on Facebook, certainly, if you just type me in there, Scott Stabile, Stabile, you'll find me there. And that's where I'm most active, and I do a lot of live videos, so those are always fun. My website is scottstabile.com. The book, Big Love, is available. I mean, it's available online everywhere. It's available in most stores. And if you find it's not in your local store, please tell them to carry it and order it from there. And I also do the audiobook version if you'd rather hear it read to you. And there's the ebook version, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, everywhere books are sold.
Fantastic. And if you didn't catch scottstabile.com, then come on over to inspirenationshow.com and we'll get you over to scottstabile.com. Scott, yes, that is a big woohoo! This has been beautiful. You're beautiful. You are shining bright. You are the real deal. And because of your openness and authenticity, you're changing a lot of lives.
Thank you so much, Michael. I would repeat the exact same thing to you.
Thank you, Scott. Any last words of wisdom you want to share with people today?
No, just a reminder to everyone listening that you are so very worthy and so very loved exactly as you are. That's it.
Woohoo! So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get big love, and begin opening your heart today and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much, Scott.
Michael, this was great. Thank you. I loved it. Really, you're so good at what you do, really. And I feel like we went through at least 50 questions.
We did get on a roll there. I'm like, now make sure you don't give the whole book away.
Yeah. No, it was great. I loved it. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!